Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Meeta and Tosh show. These are the Q&A sessions. And for those of you who don't know us, I'm Meeta Sani, and this is Tosh Bulpatia. Hi, Tosh.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. How are you? All right? You all right, Meeta?
Yeah, I'm really well. Thank you, Tosh. The weather out there is not so bright. And unfortunately, talking about redundancies is also not so bright. But I'm hoping that through engaging with everyone on today, we can give them some really clear support to help them through these challenging times.
You know what? Maybe it's the wrong word, but I'm kind of excited about today's session because we've got lots of really useful things that are going to just help people get through this, like we've been trying to do all the way through. And everybody, you know what the forum is, and if you don't know the forum, it's the chat box is on the right. Ask questions as we're going through this. We'll look at them at the end as well, but we'll keep dipping in and out. And also, don't be shy to contact us afterwards. There's no reason at all that we can't do that.
Now, Tosh, I lost you for a minute there, so it's very possible that our audience lost you as well. Guys, can everyone let me know if you can see and hear myself and Tosh all right? Do you want to say that a bit again, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't know whether it's me, Patrick, or not. So basically what I was saying was we're going to put loads of useful information in here. With lots of practical stuff about redundancies and obviously equality in the workplace as well. Yeah. And just real step-by-step tips. And also, Meeta and I know I say this every time, I just really want to hammer it home. We are absolutely wanting to help people and just put some good out there. So if you don't get what you need in this session, contact us outside of it. Email, phone calls, all the usual things. We genuinely want to help. The way you'll find out that's true is by just reaching out to us, all right?
Absolutely. We like to talk about our specialist subjects, don't we? That's what it's about. So the format, just to confirm, is the 30 to 40-minute session, depending on the questions that are coming through. We're then going to be doing this every Thursday at 11 o'clock. So again, the topics come from you. So there will be a request for your feedback. Grade us, let us know whether you value the time that you commit to us and that you get something from it. And also where there are topics that you might want to have covered and whatever is on your mind and challenging you in your world at the moment, please let us know and we will make sure these topics are on the agenda for the coming weeks.
Yeah.
So cool. Today, Tosh and I are going to be talking about two really topical subjects. First and foremost, we're going to be talking about redundancies, which we know is all over the news now. Tosh, you've brought some stats on that today, haven't you?
Yep, I have. I've joined you with your stats. I know your stats queen, but I brought a few stats as well.
Perfect. Good. I mean, that helps us really understand the magnitude and the challenge of what we're covering. Yeah. And the second topic we're going to cover today is all around equality, diversity and inclusion. We know that the Black Lives Matter protests and the movement is really high on the social agenda, but I'm going to share some statistics with you about why it should be really high, not just morally, but commercially for everyone in business as well. So we're going to start with redundancy, but we've got EDL to come as well.
Yep, great. Can I start, Meeta, with a few stats just to put things in context? Because so many people are going through this process now of, do I do redundancies now? When do I do it? What do I need to look at? And so forth. Right now, I mean, there's loads of people will have heard this on the news. Rolls-Royce, they did 9,000 redundancies. British Airways did 12,000 redundancies. BP did 10,000. Bentley did 1,000. Virgin Atlantic has done 3,000. EasyJet has done 4,500 redundancies. Oasis and Warehouse have done about nearly 2,000 redundancies. The list goes on. So there's loads of people dealing with these problems right now. And I think, Meeta, with this conversation, we're going to go through we've kind of talked about it a bit before, but we'll just go through step by step in terms of what it is that you need to know to be able to do it correctly.
Yeah, something that Tosh and I bring, which is such a good balance, we feel to add value, is that we bring the commerciality of what an organization is going through and what drives us. And Tosh brings the law, but not just the law in textbook form, but you actually say to clients, what is the outcome you want? And then we can work on it together within the confines of the law.
Exactly. The law is not there to stop things from happening. It's about how to make things work in the correct way. And then if you can't make it work in the correct way, you just need to, as a business, need to understand what are you in for? What are the potential consequences? And then you need to see whether you can manage those sorts of things. It's really about choices.
Yeah, very much so. So Tosh, for me as a business and facing some of the same challenges as all of the companies you just mentioned, and also for many of our audience, timing, the the impact on people. I was just saying to you that even though everyone, we're facing furlough, we're facing financial challenges, but at the moment, because of the furlough support, everyone's felt in a sort of relatively secure bubble of certainty. But as soon as redundancies start, that's going to shatter, isn't it? I mean, this is the reality really coming to hit home now, isn't it?
The furlough scheme was intended as an alternative to redundancy. And I want everyone to remember that it was always a voluntary scheme. There was no obligation as such for an employer to go into that process. And now that the scheme is slowly being tapered down, starting from August, employers are going to suddenly have increased costs. Well, if they haven't got the money coming in, the scheme will no longer form its function of avoiding redundancies, which is why people are looking at what those costs are right now.
Yeah.
Now is the right time to look at it.
Yeah, very much so. The fact that we have got access to the furlough scheme till the end of October means that the sooner, in my recommendation, organisations start to plan their people approach, plan their strategy for the business, and therefore plan who are the right people to put into the pool, the quicker and the more support, financial support they'll have, and they won't get caught out.
And actually, Meeta, we can plan quite straightforwardly. Speak to your accountant if you don't know yourself, because we already know what our increased costs are going to be from now until October, don't we? Yeah. We know what the scheme covers and doesn't cover. We know what we need to contribute, which means we already know the increased costs. Now the question is do we have the money coming in to cover that and some or not? And if you don't, then you're going to be looking at redundancies.
Yeah. So as Tosh and I start talking about process and situations, please remember the chat box is on the right here. Any questions you have, we're going to attempt to answer them. And if there are more questions than time, then we're going to make sure we do a follow-up recorded video as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So if there's a question on my lips, it's probably on many other organisations' lips at this moment, Tosh, and that is really, how do we start thinking about who goes into this redundancy pool? How do we make that fair? How do we make that inclusive so that nobody feels discriminated and brings that up as a challenge in the future?
Absolutely. So number one is understanding what a redundancy is. Redundancy means there's no longer a requirement for a job of a particular kind. It doesn't mean a job title, it means the job. So if there's less work coming in, who is affected by that reduction in work at whatever levels? And then those are the people that will potentially be put into a pool of employees who are at risk of redundancy. So your question is how do you then select those people?
Yes.
So number one is, what is the job? What is the job? Because you need to make a criteria to determine who the best people are for the job. So how do you determine that? So I'll give you an example. Let's say it's my own firm. Let's say it's employment lawyers. So what are the key factors for an employment lawyer? What are the skills I want to retain to keep them there? The same way with your business, Meeta, what are the key skills you need to retain to keep the business going? Yeah. So for me, it would be probably who are the highest fee earners? Who are the ones that win the most tribunal cases? Who manage to get the most clients in and keep them? Who get the best feedback? Who does the best contracts and handbooks and document compliance? Whatever the different criteria is, you get a list of the things that are important, right?
Yeah.
Then what you do is you do a scoring for each criteria. Let's say 0 to 10. 0 is the worst, 10 is the best.
Yeah.
And then you've got to think about, Meeta, why does somebody get 1? Why does somebody get 6, 5, 10?
Yeah.
Because if somebody challenges it, you've got to be able to say why, which means really you should have a criteria for the scoring. So that it's very clear what your thought process is. If you've got measurable appraisal systems and things that will show how you've scored it, well, that's fine. If not, that's the way you select. And the ones with the lowest score are at risk of redundancy, and those that are not, are not.
Yeah. And again, really basic questions. All of this is work done up to the point where you start the consultation period, isn't it?
Yes, correct. Remember, the idea is it doesn't have to be for sure there's no work coming in. If you anticipate there's no more work coming in, that's a redundancy situation, effectively. So then you just need to apply that process in terms of selecting fairly. It can't be because of your personal relationship with them or because you're friends with them. There's got to be some objective, measurable standard to be able to explain why you've scored them and why those people are at risk of redundancy. And
I think something that you've told us in the past as well, which is really key, is that you can weight certain criteria higher than others. So you could score 10 in experience, but actually that would be worth 20 because it's double weighted over in example, our world, ability to work independently without management, because so many organizations are going to need people to work from home and therefore be able to be more independent and without such close supervision, but that may not be as important as experience. So you could weight the experience high as a higher score, couldn't you?
You absolutely could, and that would separate then the more, or increase the gap between those more important skill sets than not. But for example, the point you've just used is experience. Well, how do you measure that? Does that mean how many years they've been in the job? Does that mean how many years they've been with you? Does it mean how many years qualified? I know solicitors that are 20 years qualified that aren't as good as some that are 5, for example.
Bring other criteria in as well.
Yeah, so you just need to understand what if that's a big deal. Why is that a big deal? Because if I was 5 years qualified and I thought I was better than the 20 years qualified, I've obviously got to explain why. Why am I going? I'm better for your organization. So you see what I'm saying? You've got to be very clear what that means. What is the experience you're looking at? Why is it relevant?
Yeah, and so you would have a different scoring grid for each type of role put into a redundancy pool.
Correct.
Thank you. What would be next? So we've got the criteria, we've thought about, we've scored people. We know that some are scoring an average of 7. We know some are scoring an average of 2. How do you then decide? Is there a line that you draw and say, right, anybody under 5 goes in?
Yeah.
Do you put everyone in?
I'm assuming you need a reduction in headcount. That headcount is also based on your costs, effectively. Yeah. So if you know you need to lose 5 people, effectively, out of 10, for example, because we need to cut the wage costs in 50% or whatever the situation is, well, those with the lowest 5 scores will be at risk of redundancy. But remember, just because they're at risk of the job is redundant doesn't mean the employee is redundant, because the next step is looking at suitable alternative employment. The number one thing I want everybody to remember is you have to be able to stand up, if it ever came to it, in front of a judge and explain why redundancy was the last reasonable resort. If you forget everything else we're saying, that's the key. Well, we did everything we could reasonably do to avoid a redundancy. So one of those next things, as I say, is suitable alternative employment. That means something in keeping with your skills, qualifications, hours, all those sorts of things you'd expect. But that doesn't mean you ignore lesser jobs or even higher jobs or perhaps even a horizontal move. Just look at what's reasonable and available.
And this is something you will do during the consultation period, isn't it? In partnership with the employees that are being considered for redundancy. So it's a conversation you have to say you're up for redundancy. There's a potential, but, I'd like you to go away and think about what other role might be right for you. That would be the right thing to do, would it, Tosh?
Absolutely. The obligation is actually on the employer to try and find suitable alternative employment. But from a practical point of view, employees should be looking. Ask for the other intranet details or the notice boards or whatever exists. I suspect, Meeta, most places won't have suitable alternative employment. I suspect in the current climate, but consider it, show that you've considered it and that there's nothing there. Don't not consider it.
We have to consider it. That's part of the process. That's
part of the process. You have an obligation to consider suitable alternative employment.
Yes. Right. So then where would we go from here? So if we've got to the end of the consultation period, can you just clarify the periods of consultation time?
Sure. So step 1 is you start the consultation process, right? Consultation starting, it doesn't mean you've got to give a notice for a letter. You can literally call them into meeting and tell them why they're at risk of redundancy. Consultation means let's have a reasonable, grown-up, transparent chat about why they're at risk of redundancy, what the next steps are, how long the process is for, when are you likely to be made redundant, what are you likely to get as part of a redundancy package. It's just all the things you would want to know, right? That consultation period, the length of it is determined in law by the number of people that are at risk of redundancy.
Okay.
So if it is 20 to 99 employees, then the minimum consultation period is 30 days. If it is 100 or more, then it's a minimum consultation of 45 days. If it's under 20, it's just whatever's reasonable in all the circumstances, which could be a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
The longer the period, the better. If you fail to meet those consultation obligations, there's something called a protective award, which means that an employee could claim up to 13 weeks real pay per employee for failing to consult. So that can be quite expensive if you get that wrong. So, just, if there's more than 20, make sure you're doing the right consultation periods is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So just before we move on to the next steps, Tosh, we've got a question from Linda here. So Linda is asking, when deciding on what the job is, can you replace with an outside source, such as a day-to-day accountant? Oh,
yes, you can outsource just in the way you would do if it wasn't any other circumstances. The question is, why? Why are we doing that? How are we doing that? Because if we're saying that the job is no longer required in-house and we're doing it we're outsourcing it, presumably you've got a good business justification reason for doing that. There may be other implications as well, which I won't get into now under 2P law, which means that if somebody's doing this, if that's their sole job and another company's taking it over, that person should potentially transfer across Linda. So just bear that in mind as well. But there's no reason, as long as you've got a clear business case shows a need to do this in the interest of the business.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We also have a question from Isabel asking what happens if an employee then goes off sick during this time.
Your obligation is to try and engage in meaningful consultation. If they won't participate in that because they're off sick or whatever other reason, well, you'll just carry on regardless. What that means is you write to them. So you'll write, the letter would follow the first consultation meeting anyway. Instead, it will be a letter saying that we wanted to consult with you. You were not unavailable. So here's all the things we were going to talk to you about. If you've got any questions, please let us know. But this is what's happening now. And this is what happens next. So the process is the same. You're just going to have to adapt it slightly differently in those circumstances, Isabel, to accommodate the person that's not participating for whatever reason. But it doesn't stop the wheels from turning. Life goes on. You've still got to make your decisions, still take the actions you've got to take.
And would that be the same for maternity leave? Shani is asking, what if the employee is on maternity leave?
Correct. If somebody is redundant, they're being redundant. The fact that they are on maternity leave, or perhaps there are some other protected characteristic, discrimination law, whether it's race, sex, religion, age, gender reassignment, any of those, the discrimination laws, that's irrelevant as long as the process that you're following doesn't have that as a factor for determining why you're making somebody redundant. As long as that's completely excluded, which it is. There's a genuine redundancy situation. Whether they're pregnant, it's not because they're pregnant. If it's race, it's not because of their race. If it's a female, it's not because of their female or any other issues.
You score them exactly the same way.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a question from Joellen here. So Joellen is asking, in terms of letting our people know they have the right of appeal with a senior manager not involved in the decision, however, the only team left have been involved in the decisions, how would we manage that? So this is going into when the redundancy has taken place, the decisions have been made. The right of appeal process is what Joellen's asking.
So the purpose of having a separate person at the appeal, Joe, is to look at it like with fresh eyes, effectively, so that their mind hasn't already been tainted by being involved in the process up to that point. If you don't have any other people, you don't have any other people, which means that you would have somebody doing the appeal who was either not involved or was involved. If they were not involved, it's no issue. If they were involved, well, yes, there's an argument the employee could say, well, look, it should have been somebody different. But if you haven't got the choices to do that, you haven't. Then that person has to make their decision stand up against whatever the arguments are. So they can say, yep, you're right, I did deal with this before, but look, here's the reasoning. Here's the right reason why you were made redundant. That still stands at the appeal. Nothing has changed. Those reasons are well-founded. So if you've got the evidence to support a redundancy situation, i.e. no longer a requirement for that job, and you followed the right steps, meaningful consultation, fair selection, consideration of suitable alternative employment, and then redundancy is the last resort, the truth is, it doesn't matter who does the appeal.
Yeah.
As long as you can justify your decision.
Yeah. And I have to say that I have been there to help organisations where they have got an appeal. I have stepped in and been that independent person to put a fresh pair of eyes. So if there is any advice that you want on that, please feel free to reach out to me as well.
Absolutely. There's nothing stopping you, Joe, from outsourcing. Yeah. Getting an HR person in to do it if you've got nobody in. I guess at the moment, because we're looking at potential redundancies, costs are an issue, in which case just get somebody to do it within the organisation. If that's not clear, or if the details are not clear about that, Joe, just give me a bell, please.
Fantastic. Right. We've got a question from Helen. Helen is asking, could you interview everyone if you have a number of people doing the same job as a way of scoring individuals for redundancy?
Yes. Yeah, it's a bit, Helen, like when you were first advertising for the job. You would interview them to determine who the best person is for the role. The difference now is you know the candidates. You already know what their skill sets are, so it should be an easier process. Your issue is to be able to objectively justify what your scoring is.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, the answer is yes. You can do it as an interview process.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tosh. And Diane is asking whether there is a difference in the process for those with under 2 years. Should we take them to the same process to make sure we don't discriminate?
So again, it comes down to the evidence. I don't want you to go on the back foot, so to speak. So if I accuse you of discriminating against me, you could start saying, no, we didn't do those things. Or you could say, look, that's not correct. This is what we did. So what I'm saying to you here is, should you follow the same process? I've always advised clients they don't have to, because less than 2 years, an employee cannot claim redundancy pay, and they cannot claim the right to be unfairly dismissed. So all they're entitled to is their notice pay and holiday pay. If you are concerned that there is a discrimination element to that, or there's an argument for it, then go through the process. Make it absolutely clear. But I suspect there won't be. I suspect you'll have the evidence to show why there's a genuine redundancy, and the person's, whatever the issue is of discrimination, has no bearing on it whatsoever.
Yeah.
So rather than being on the back foot saying we didn't do that, just be clear on why you are doing what you are doing is what I'm saying. Go take the front foot.
Great. Thank you, Tosh. What else do you think we need to know in terms of redundancy in the process at this stage? So maybe know what you need to pay out when you're making redundancies is the first thing. So the first thing is notice pay. Notice pay is 1 week. The law says the minimum is 1 week for each complete year of service, up to a maximum of 12 weeks service for 12 years or more. So if you got 2 years service, you get 2 weeks, 3 years service, you get 3 weeks. If it's 12 or more years employment, that's a maximum of 12 weeks notice. That's the notice pay, unless the contract of employment gives more. Then it's whatever's in the contract. That's number one. Okay.
I'll go back to that in a minute about whether furlough pay covers it or not covers it in a second, okay? The next thing that you need to be able to pay out is the holiday entitlement, anything that's accrued but not been taken. And the third thing, of course, is redundancy pay. Redundancy pay is tax-free, and it's based on a formula. The formula is based on age, length of service, and a weekly pay capped at £538.
Yeah.
The age has a multiplier in this formula for calculating it. So depending on what age you are, depends on what the multiplier will be, whether it's half, 1.5, or what have you. What I'm going to suggest you do, anybody that doesn't know how to do it, is literally just Google it. It's really straightforward. Google, how do I calculate redundancy pay? You'll have to fill in the various gaps in the information, and it will just spit out the right information for you, okay? But that's the way it's done.
Brilliant.
That is if you're doing it correctly. If you get it wrong, then you are looking, if you fail to consult properly, I mentioned earlier, you're looking at about 13 weeks pay, up to 13 weeks pay per employee. So definitely get that bit right. And if it is an unfair dismissal, because you haven't got a fair reason or you haven't followed the correct fair process, you could be liable to up to 1 year's pay of the employee's salary, or the maximum legal cap is £88,500. So it's whichever hits first. That's your worst case scenario.
Great. Thank you, Tosh. We've got a comment for encouragement from Veronica regarding meaningful consultation. So she had a situation where employees had all decided to reduce their hours so that no one person has been made redundant amongst some of the outcomes. So that's a real positive show of humanity. They're working together and getting positive outcomes. I heard of another story like that where an employer had a similar conversation and they all agreed to go part-time rather than deciding which ones would stay and go. So giving them consultation to work together to come up with a solution. I love that.
I really love that. You know, I think that says more, Veronica, about whoever that organization is, that their employees feel that they would do that in that sense. So that says to me they were probably looking after them in the right way beforehand, even.
Yeah, very much so.
I just want to mention one more thing before we move on to the next thing. I'm conscious of time, which is not a legal obligation as such, Meeta, but it's just the legal obligation is to be fair and reasonable in all the circumstances. So redundancy is the last reasonable resort, right? So there's something else called bumping. Bumping is where there's somebody else who is not at risk of redundancy, but perhaps the person who's at risk of redundancy could do that job better than the other person. So if, as an employment lawyer, if I'm at risk of redundancy and I go to my, if I worked in a firm that did lots of different areas of law, and I say, look, I could do conveyancing lawyer much better than your conveyancing lawyer can because of whatever reason I'm going to give, they can put me in a pool with that person. If I score better off, I get the job, they get made redundant, even though they were never at risk of redundancy in the first place. That's bumping. And it's relevant for employers to know that they can retain the skills that are important for their business to go forward. That's the focus here, okay? It's not the individuals. I know it feels very personal for the employees and probably for the employers as well. You know, you've known a lot of these people for a long time. And it doesn't have to be done in an abrupt or inhuman way. The situation is a crappy situation, if I can say it. It is what it is, but it can still be delivered in the best way that you can do it, right?
And you know, I'm a big advocate of the outplacement service. This is encouraging an outside provider to walk these people who have been made redundant through exiting, through resetting their objectives for life, to helping them get their CVs and confidence back on track and getting back out there and delivering, getting success back in their world. You know, something that we've been talking to clients about is the fact that there's a lot of costs involved in outplacement services. But actually, if you look at the return on investment, a few £100s to support somebody exiting could mean that you wouldn't have to spend a recruitment fee or spend the time recruiting when you're ready to rehire 6 months, a year down the line. So something we've been talking about very much is really thinking about what you're investing in. Yes, we've got to save money short term, but we know business is cyclical. There could be an argument to invest a little bit in looking after these people. And through that, we are now helping keep those people in their networks. So when they are ready to rehire, there's a positive story and a connection that creates a very smooth return. Which
I like that, Meeta, because it means we're all looking at firefighting. Most of the people out there are looking at the short-term firefighting. They're not necessarily looking at it as a strategic long-term scenario. And I appreciate both things are important, but you're right. Make sure you've thought about it both ways before you just make a reaction. We've got to do this, we've got to do that.
Now we've got one more question from Linda, and then we'll spend the last 5 or 10 minutes just talking about EDI. Linda is asking, is there a time limit on replacing an employee who has been made redundant and subsequently decide need that role? So I think what she means is if we've let somebody go,
how long can we wait till we replace them?
Yeah.
There isn't as such, Linda. The issue is this. At the time that you as an employer made the decision to make somebody redundant, was it fair and reasonable in the circumstances? So if subsequently it turns out that there's other opportunities and whatever else, it's not really relevant. You can get them back. You don't have an obligation to. The only time limit that really exists is the 3 months minus 1 day from the date of dismissal, which is the time limit for an employee to make a claim for unfair dismissal. So,
right.
So if there was an opportunity for that, if you replace them after 3 months and they haven't made a claim for that, well then they'll be out of time. But as such, there isn't. You know, it just depends on what was in your mind at the time that you made the decision in the first place.
Yeah.
Why did you make it redundant?
We're probably going to wrap up on redundancy.
Let me wrap up with 2 things just to leave everybody with on the redundancy point. Number 1 is just because the job is redundant doesn't mean the person is redundant. You need to look at what is the last reasonable resort. You're looking at reasonable ways to avoid a redundancy. You get those things right in your mind, you're really not going to go far wrong. If you're still unclear, reach out to the experts, reach out to us.
Now, it seems strange talking about hiring policies when we are currently talking about redundancy, but the practices and the policies we put in place now will lend to having the best practices going forward as you start looking at growing your worlds again. So that Tosh and I wanted to talk to you about is how to make sure that you've got a strong hiring strategy that is inclusive for equality and diversity. We know that Black Lives Matters is everywhere at the moment, and for very, very sad reasons. But actually, there's not only a moral reason why we as a country and as a society should be doing this, but I wanted to share some statistics with you that are quite amazing, actually. So according to some analysis from McKinsey, diverse exec boards return higher earnings.
I think you froze, Meeta. I don't know if it was you or me again, I'm afraid.
Oh, you froze earlier. It's bloody freezing outside as well.
I don't know who it was. Just to make sure. Just to make sure. Stop the swearing, you. Make sure everybody heard it. Can you start again? You just started talking about the.
So first and foremost, only 50% of recruiters say that their strategies are actually designed to attract diverse candidates. So I'm actually going to share with you an example of a blind hiring policy in a minute to help with that. Secondly, there's a clear evidence that diverse organizations have competitive advantages. So McKinsey, the worldwide consultancy, did an analysis showing diverse exec boards return higher earnings and higher return on equity. Multicultural networks increase creativity, and proven is that a diverse group of problem solvers will outperform a high ability group of problem solvers. That's pretty amazing. And finally, through a study of 500 organizations, it was found that for 1%, for a 1% increase for gender and racial diversity, it directly correlated with a 3 to 9% increase in sales revenue. I mean, wow.
That's interesting. It's really interesting. I didn't realize that at all.
Yeah. So it really is important for everyone in a senior leadership team to have equality, diversity, and inclusion at the top of their agenda to have a successful organization. One of the things we know is that from working remotely, from this agile working... Oh, we're all freezing today. We're really sorry if we're not getting the technology right. The connections are tough today. But one of the things I was going to say is just by having this remote working option, we are now being able to be more inclusive for returners, mum returners, dad returners to work who want flexible options, carers, people with disabilities. So it's not just about race and sex. It is truly about being inclusive. And just to share with you, I'm going to do a little presentation, Josh, getting technical. I'm just going to share with you what I've seen out there with some of our clients, and I think is really powerful, is starting by having, as an organization, a blind recruitment policy. So this will allow you to avert unconscious bias. And if you start with this, you can share this on your website. You can share this as a link on your adverts. You can send this out to candidates when they do apply as a response. And it allows you as an employer to show that you set your stake in the sand to make sure that equality, diversity, and inclusion is at the top of your agenda. So we can see here as context, it says that as an employer, equal opportunities is everything. We're embracing individuality and diversity. And it talks about employing irrespective of all the different backgrounds and protective qualities that we have to be considerate of. It also talks about the purpose. So the purpose of this policy is to ensure that blind recruitment allows the organization to address and remove bias, whether that's conscious or unconscious, and allows CV screening and shortlisting to be really fair. We know that CVs for a very long time have removed dates of education. People are even removing hobbies now to ensure that, this gender bias isn't there. And the benefit for everyone is that employers will assess candidates, whether directly sourced or through a recruitment partner like ourselves. It will be on an equal basis and purely based on bringing the best talent to the organization. And I think that is so powerful. You can see below here as well, it talks about everything that a CV will not include. So it won't include names, it won't include age, it won't include gender, and it won't include education in terms of dates. It will include education in terms of institution, but everything else will be omitted.
Can I just put my penny's worth in here? So I understand this policy. I also think it's a little bit of the world gone a bit mad. You can't have their name, you can't have their age, you can't have their gender. But actually, you can. The reason this is the best practice guidance is that there's no argument that you're being discriminatory. Totally get that.
For me, it's about making the world a better place, one increment at a time. And in the business world, my stats that I spoke about right at the start show that this will help organizations. And you're right. As you said right at the beginning of our Q&A session, people can actually do what they want. It's understanding the consequences. I'm hoping to make professional and commercial and a moral argument to show that there are very small shifts that we need to make as employers to help our future workforce be diverse and therefore be even more effective and successful.
I think you're right. The point I was only going to make was if they do have those things in there, just be very clear why you are selecting somebody or not selecting somebody. But you're right, by following the approach that you've said there, there's not even the argument. How practical that is in terms of the information you might want to see. I mean, for me, for example, I'd want to see experience and so forth. But you're right. I guess it just depends on how the interview goes and other factors that you look at. But the key is just not choose them because of that, those protected characteristics.
Well, what we're doing and we're helping our clients achieve is actually a hiring strategy with stages that allows unconscious bias to be removed. So looking at this list of 5 points that we think are really key and helpful, you may decide to bring them all in, you may decide to bring 1 or 2 in. But the first one is job adverts. We all advertise out there, and using language like ambitious and using language like dominating and confident. Sometimes this language, and I know Tosh, you're going to say it's the world gone mad again.
Yeah.
applying for roles. So it's just being mindful of that when you're thinking about the language you use.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit, Meeta, right? What's wrong with the word ambitious?
Because
I can understand young, young secretary wanted for something or other. That A, it doesn't have to be young. B, it doesn't need to be a female. I can understand those things. What's wrong with words like ambitious?
And, I think if it's just the word ambitious amongst the rest of the advert being very well put together, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's about the tone. I think it's about language. And I think, as we know, communication is more than just words. So it's about how it's put together. And again, we're really helping our clients to make sure they get that right balance. Something else that's really interesting is about how the next stage of the process is conducted. So there's new technology that allows CV sifting to be done by AI. So it looks back at everyone that's already employed in your organization and all the words that come up to describe them. And then it shortlists based on the similar criteria. I think that's
that's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, really clever. And then there's people are now replacing CVs because of all these things that, that policy, the blind policy said would be omitted. Some organizations are saying, actually, you know what? I'm just going to pick a set of questions to ask rather than asking for a CV. We know there are risks. We know that there could be people removed. These are just different ways that you could bring in one or all ideas into your hiring strategy to remove bias and to make sure you have a more diverse workforce. So this would be setting a set of questions that would get you the answers you need to make sure that this person is right for the role. Similarly, blind interviewing would be a similar way. You'd see a CV with lots of information retracted, and then the stage one would be really just looking at answers to questions and doing it via written response as a stage one. So you don't see them and you don't hear them. Again, it will allow you to see whether you are bringing the right people through and you have got the right criteria for what good looks like for the roles you're trying to recruit for. And then the final one about not having hobbies, again, Tosh, you'd think, well, in this day and age, there should be no gender hobbies, right? Driving cars, cooking. It's a free for all, and it should be that way. But this is another approach that organisations are using to make sure that the bias around inequality is removed.
I've not heard that one before about hobbies.
Yeah.
You know my view on these things, Meeta. I think we need to have a lot more practical sort of thing. I think this will provide some safety for any employer. I've got no doubt about it. How that works in practice, I think we should explore further, but we won't have a chance in this session. But definitely, I'd like to dig deeper with this.
And I actually just have to just look back at the questions. We've got a couple of minutes left, and we're going to look at what's left there. What I would say is, if anybody does have any more questions around creating a hiring policy that is truly, linked to creating inclusion in your organizations, please reach out. Looking at the stats that we talked about straight away about how a diverse workforce creates an increase in ROI and productivity in sales, it's a no-brainer. And Tosh, I love our yin to the yang. It has to be practical, it has to be sustainable, and it has to add value. So we want to get all of that right. Yes, go for it.
I didn't cover here as well. This is the right thing to do. What happens if you get it wrong? So I'll say that very quickly. From my point of view as a lawyer, because I'm always looking at consequences of certain actions. So if you get this wrong, if there's a discriminatory policy, there's something called the Vento bans. I'll say it very quickly. And it's something where an employee is entitled to something called injury to feelings. At the moment, that's up to £45,000. But in certain situations, if you can really show some sort of psychiatric illness as a result of discrimination or not being able to work again, it could be uncapped. It could be all the way until they retire. Quite frankly, but generally speaking, the awards are in 3 bands, and the top band could be up to 45 grand if you get it wrong. And it's not that difficult to get it right. Put these things in place, get the right policies in place, and implement them. I don't mean just make it a document. Actually promote people, recruit people in the right way, and talk to people like us if you don't know how to do that. That's all.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that this is our future and we should embrace it and encourage it, because it's only going to help our organisations be more successful. But Tosh, I've got one more question for you, and it's actually a really good question to close on, and you've got less than a minute to answer it. Emma is asking, you did say you would...
I think so, wouldn't I? Thank you for reminding us. Thank you very much.
Redundancies. So let's talk about that.
Yep. Okay. So this is the situation. It's been going back and forth, so I'll do it real quick. Notice pay. Do you pay 80% or do you pay 100%? So the rules, there's nothing been tested in the tribunal, so we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, and it's going to probably sound a bit complicated, but I'll try and keep it simple. An employee statutory minimum notice, we discussed that earlier, 1 week for each year of service. If their contract gives them at least 1 week more than the minimum notice period under law, then you can pay 80%. You can pay the furlough pay during their notice period. If it is not that, if it is not a week more than the statutory notice, you have to pay their full notice pay, is what the law says.
Okay.
There are various devices that a tribunal could use if it ever gets tested to get full pay. Maybe they'll imply a term that the furlough pay was never intended to cover notice. It was only ever there to be able to avoid a redundancy. So they may say that. There may be other devices in terms of the way that the tribunals will interpret it, because it seems counterintuitive to allow the employers to pay people less in those circumstances. Nevertheless, at the moment, if the contract says that they get 1 week's more notice than the statutory minimum, then you would be able to pay the notice during the furlough, as it currently stands.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up today, Tosh. How do you think?
Can we have another quick look to see if we need to do any follow-up? Have you got everything in there? Have you already checked that out, Meeta?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Thank you very much. I hope that's been really useful to everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you for the questions. Thanks for the insight, and reach out if there's anything else that you want answers to. And if not, we'll see you 11 a.m. next Thursday. And have a lovely week. Stay safe, everyone.
See you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.